My name is Herbert Adams. I was born and raised here in Pacific. Went to Pacific High School, graduated from Pacific High School, played sports from track, football, and basketball in Pacific High School. Pacific High School is where I met my wife, Yolanda Adams, and we met through sports. She was an athlete as well. And my parents, my dad, my father, he was born and raised here in Pacific, and his father before that, and his father before that. It goes all the way back to the Revolution, all the way back to slavery. So my family's been here for quite a while. As far as my participation in city government, I was first elected as municipal judge in 1980. What makes that election stands out is that I was 24 years old when I was elected. The ordinance calls for you to be 25 to take office. So I was lucky enough that in 2 weeks, within 2 weeks of being installed, I had a birthday. So I was 25 by the time I had to be installed. So I met the requirements of the ordinance. I did 12 consecutive years as municipal judge. It was 2 years terms at that time. It was a great job. I love that job. And then after that, in 1992, I ran for mayor. And again, I was lucky. I was elected, and then elected 3 times after that. Not consecutively, but 2 different time periods. So I was a municipal judge for 16 years. I was mayor for 14 years, being absent for a while. I came back and served 2 terms as alderman. So my wife has a long experience with me being in municipal politics. But during all of that, going back to when and growing up, the Red Cedar has been here going back before me. And I remember the Red Cedar being a great restaurant. My mother and father, they loved going to the Red Cedar. Years ago, when the liquor law was different, you could only buy a certain beers and only could buy that on Sunday. And the Red Cedar was one of the establishments, and probably the only establishment in Pacific where you could buy beer on Sunday. So that's one of the things that I remember the most about Red Cedar, because everybody came to Red Cedar on Sunday for beer. The second thing that I remember the most was, even though most people loved their fried chicken, they were better known for their fried chicken and for their catfish. I love liver. And as far as I was concerned, and as far as I was concerned then, and as far as I'm concerned now, no one ever made liver and gravy better than the Red Cedar. Now, my mother, she's no longer here with us, and if she was, I would have to say that she was the best. But the truth of the matter is that Red Cedar was the best with liver and gravy as far as I'm concerned. But the Red Cedar has a long history, very, very long history, a different history for each one of us that grew up in this town. We all have some fond memories of the Red Cedar. But I was fortunate enough that in elective office, the Red Cedar became available. The Smith family, they had finally had enough of doing the restaurant business, and the Red Cedar was empty, and I approached the Smith family about purchasing the Red Cedar. And my intent was for the Red Cedar to be a museum and a welcome center. So some years went by before the city finally purchased the Red Cedar. And I was absent at the time when the purchase was made. But I came back as alderman, and there was no real renovation plan for the Red Cedar. It seemed like me the intentions was just to move in as it was, and that would have been fine because it was a fine building. But my wife and I, my family, we move around quite a bit throughout the country. There's never a time that when we go visit other cities that I don't go visit a park or go visit a museum. So I had a lot of my own ideas on the concept of a museum. So I insisted, I pushed, had a lot of help from the mayor at the time, Mayor Myers, and then I had 5 other good aldermen that seen what I seen. They had the same kind of experiences with museums as I've had, and I want to see it put back as close as we could, put it back in its original state, to do a complete renovation, something that would live way past our lifetime. And so, fortunate enough, we got citizens' input. We had several meetings. We brought in engineers and architects and designers and listened to the public and took their ideas and came up with what you see now. So I'm very happy. I'm very lucky that I had an opportunity to take part in renovating the Red Cedar and bringing it to what it is today. So I believe that if with patience from our citizens, if they would give it time, that the Red Cedar will take a very serious part in this part of the country as far as being established as a great museum. And we here in Pacific have many advantages, and one of our advantage is, no question in my mind, is the Red Cedar. But another advantage is that the Red Cedar sits on historical 66, another huge advantage. And so there's as far as I'm concerned, there's a learning curve for all of us. And if we all take part in the vision of Pacific being, or the Red Cedars being a competitive museum in the area, if we take the time, put in the effort, have the volunteers, and spend a little money. We have to spend money. And don't expect a great return. We will have a great museum.
And now, with your family, being here for so long, and you yourself growing up here, like how you remember the Red Cedar, do you remember any other establishments that are no longer here, that haven't survived like the Red Cedar has in town?
I don't know how much history they play historical, but we all have stories about some of the good old days and some of the good things that we remember in Pacific. And the one thing that my brother and I was just talking about just a few days ago was the golf course. Pacific at one time had a golf course, and us old timers, we remember that, we know that. And where the Cedars subdivision and the grocery store, the B&H grocery store, Conyers was the family that owned that golf course. Yeah, so that's the first thing that popped in my mind as far as our history. And there's some other things that maybe some people wouldn't think would be all that important to mention, but I remember a couple of our local business people, Gross Bakery. Anybody that is my age or older remember Gross Bakery. I wish that was a family business that would have lasted, and because I would sure love for my children and my grandchildren to have that experience of a true bakery. Now, I haven't tested or tasted a lot of bakery goods in the area over time, because nowadays you got Dunkin' Donuts and things like that. But if we were gonna compare Grocer's Bakery to some of the bakeries that I'm aware of, they couldn't touch Grocer's Bakery. And I'm not the only one that would tell you that. If you love homemade food, truly homemade. Another thing that pops to mind that I wish was still here, and I wish that at that time period that we felt about history as we feel about it today, and that's the old train depot. I can still see it, the old train depot. And there's pictures of the depot, but that's one of the things that I wish that we would have saved.
And where exactly was that located at?
You know, when you go into the old downtown, the historical downtown of Pacific, and as you cross over the railroad tracks right there at First Street, so you got two sets of railroad tracks, and as you're traveling south, and when you get in between those railroad tracks, if you would look east, and just a few yards away is where that depot set. Yeah. Another restaurant that comes to mind is Parrett Restaurant. And I'm sure if you've interviewed other people, they probably mentioned Parrott Restaurant. And I'm sure that after you and I talk, there will be others. Parrott Restaurant, just a half a mile or better from Red Cedar, what now is Osage Dental. That's where it was located. And just like the Red Cedar, it was a good restaurant. Great food. And anytime today when you think about hamburgers, you think about McDonald's, first comes to mind. Culver comes to mind, and Hardee's come to mind. But back in those days, Parrish Restaurant came to mind when you thought about hamburgers. So that's another establishment that I wish still was here. If we could have saved that building and made that part of our history, made that part of telling Pacific's history.
Do you remember, because we saved with the Beacon Court, Beacon Motel, we managed to save the sign, the neon sign. It's now the Beacon Car Wash.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember anything about the actual hotel, like where it was previously located?
Yeah, well, the building is still there. It's not much of a building anymore because over the many years they've let it go. But our city limits to the west of here sits right there at the high school. Okay, and just half a mile from that west, on the south side, that's where you'll find the Beacon Motel. Yeah, and you know, you start to talk about motels. Now, I don't remember all the names, but going up and down Route 66, there was other motels as well, and some of those buildings still stand. And before you get to the river, there on Route 66, they're right there in parallel with the 44. There's an old standing, in pretty good shape, brick motel. So there was quite a few motels up and down this route. Well, hopefully the Red Cedar here in the near future will become a driving force in establishing, recognizing, collecting all of Pacific in the surrounding area as well. The history, capture some of those things, and some of these buildings and objects and furniture and clothes. You can just keep naming them. Some of these things still exist. Some of our families still have some of those things, and maybe some of those things that we can preserve here in our museum. I was out of office at the time. Our mayor at the time, Steve Myers, he was alderman at the time, became mayor later. He was instrumental. He was the driving force in the city acquiring that park. So he knows quite a bit about it. Real quick, my wife probably not going to like me telling this story, but Jensen Point was always one of my favorite places to go when my wife and I were young teenagers. It overlooks the river, so quite often we would go up there just to look at the river. So that's what I remember the most about Jensen Point. In fact, when he owned Jensen Points, it was private, and he would have his own private parties. But every once in a while, he would let someone have a wedding. And I was fortunate enough to, at the time, being municipal judge, I had the responsibility and authority to perform weddings. And on one occasion, I had an opportunity to be on Jensen Point to perform a wedding. Really neat. That was really neat. Well, the municipal judge is responsible for violations that occur within the city limits of Pacific. A lot of it was traffic, but you heard a lot of other stuff too, from shoplifting, people fighting, and you just name it, whatever occurred. And the police were right into municipal court, I heard it. Back in 1980, the City Hall at that time was a small building right across the brew house. What is the McHugh building, also very historical. But right across the street there was the City Hall, very, very, very small building. So that's where I started.
And then you got a bigger upgrade.
Yeah, Mayor Weiss at the time, he envisioned a new City Hall. We had a flood prior to him being elected as mayor, and so that was one of the things that he promised, and he ended up getting the cooperation of one of our local banks who owned the property where City Hall sits today, and he built City Hall. Now, I had an opportunity that when we outgrew City Hall, particularly the police department outgrew their facilities, and that was the main reason why it needed to be expanded. So I had an opportunity to, as mayor, to play a part in the expansion of City Hall. The church, for my family, is an interesting history. The property was owned by the Myers family many, many moons ago. Steve Myers, our former mayor, it was his family that owned the property. My great-great-grandfather was a runaway slave, and when he settled here in Pacific. The records of him first show up in Arkansas. So he came further south than Arkansas, we know that. And then he joined the Union Army. There is where he got educated. He could read, he could write. He was particular about his dress. He was particular about his speech. He made all his children, which there was 12 of them, he made all his children talk properly and proper. He ended up in Pacific, and where the Catholic school, Catholic church, where it is now, that's where he settled. And he ended up purchasing the property from the Myers family and gave the property to the church. And that was the beginning of the church. My family, the Adams family, along with a lot of the other black families, that's where we all attended. Some years went by, and then some other churches came about. The Pentecostal church, Black Pentecostal, Black Methodist. But the Baptist church was the first and the largest black church. My family, the Adams family, that's where we all rooted from. I went to church there. My father, my mother, my siblings, my wife and I, we were married in that church. Yeah.
I was glad to see it elevated when it was, and kind of like the building the new ramps and the stairways. Again, kind of that preservation effort to help kind of preserve it.
Yes.
So I was glad for that.
Yeah, I was glad that this group, that they had such a strong interest in history, and recognized the history of that church and put all the hard work and all the effort for some years now to bring it where it is now. So I think they're almost done. I think they're almost there where they can start having services. There still need to be some work after that, but I think they're close to probably end of this year maybe having services.
That would be really nice.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm hoping that Yolanda and I and my family that we can be there the first service.
And so tell me more about the Black community in Pacific. You know, how has that changed over time?
Well, my father and others, aunts, uncles, and so on, that grew up here, they tell me that at one time that Pacific was probably half black. And so when that conversation still comes up, I try to tell everybody, you got to remember now, my dad was born in 1917. And his siblings, he has siblings older than him. And so they were born, some of them 10 years earlier. And so the time period that they remember is not the same time as we see it today. So probably Pacific was probably 500, 600, 700 people. And so one day I went on the internet, or I did something like that once I learned a little bit about the internet. And I went back just to see if I could find what the population of Pacific was back in 1917. It was around about 500 or 600 from that reporting that I seen. So the population of Pacific being half black, you might guess, you probably was looking at 100, 150 people. Most of them were on the north side of the city, the north side of Route 66, Historical 66. I had a conversation with Steve Myers, former mayor. I had a conversation with his father not too long ago. And his homestead was in the same neighborhood. And he pretty much agreed that was pretty much how things were back then. Yeah.
I know it's where, I believe it's where Clarkson Eye Care is now. Was it the B.F. Allen School?
Yes, that was where the black, Negro, color, whatever you're comfortable with. That's where their school was, and it went to the 8th grade. And then after that, most of the blacks that wanted further education, they would have to go into the St. Louis County area. A lot of my relatives and a lot of them would go to Kirkwood. They ended up going to Turner and those schools in Kirkwood. Some went as far as into the city to what we call today Sumner and Vashon. I know a lot of those families, they went there. But what happened is that when they got down in that area and finished school and got some education, that's also where the jobs were. And a lot of them didn't come back. Now my father, when he would tell his stories, his life story growing up, he would call out a lot of names, a lot of last names that were not in Pacific. But if you go to the cemetery, you would find the stones, or if you find some kind of Bible or something like that, you would see some, or talk to others, you would see some of these names that I heard from him. But a lot of them never came back. Yeah.
That's sad to hear.
Yeah.
Now,
well, you got to remember, back in those days, St. Louis was a robust city. You start talking about the 30s and the 40s, yeah, 50s.
So that was a
early
lot
50s.
Of moving to where all the jobs were out
Yeah,
there.
industry.
And I know that's like, Pacific has a history of being that like homestead town where most people would either go out to the box factory or eventually, I'm blanking on the name, the car factory. I can't remember the name of it.
You're talking about Intergram, or are you talking about Chrysler?
Chrysler, thank you. I could not,
Mhm.
I completely blanked on the name. I had a lot of people in who said that their family, their parents, and then later them before plants shut down would leave out, and no one really worked in town unless you owned your own business.
Yes.
So, and having again this deep connection with Pacific, and personally having this interest in preservation with the red cedar, and trying to keep these stories going. What, like you mentioned when you're coming in, it's good to have a short-term and a long-term goal. If you could have that power again to kind of direct things, what would you like to see the town move towards? Instead of just kind of remaining kind of idle, is there something that you really want the town to go blossom into?
Well, if we're talking about history, what I would like to see, those who have the experience that you and I had talked about earlier, that when they travel, they go to the parks, they go to the zoo, they go to the museum, and share those experiences, share the things that they see with the community. Some of those old timers share their experience, share the stories that they've heard that's been passed on. Create a community discussion. Maybe go as far as a community debate. And know that going into these discussions and these debates, that everybody who has an experience or who has an idea, they're all valid. And everyone needs to listen to the other and go into this with, let me help you. Let me help you get your experience into this vision. And then you help me. And then we all come together and find the common ground, the common things that we can work with each other and share with each other. Okay, and then put this into a great vision for short term and the long term, for finding, collecting, and preserving Pacific's history, the surrounding areas. I believe that I know that I have a lot to learn. I have a lot to learn on how do we go about doing these things. How have other people who has done it very well, how can I learn from them? How can I learn from other communities? How can I do that and then bring that here? And how can we get everybody else to think and feel the same way? To come out of our comfort zones. It's okay to go and see how other people do it. And then bring it back here and make this place competitive and make this place great. That's the challenge that I offer now. That's the challenge that I will offer if I was back in that position to do that, to create that discussion. It should not be no one person's vision. It should not be no one group vision. There's too many families here that has roots here. There's many that are coming here that wants to play a part here, that should be allowed to take part. We all just got to listen to each other. So that's always a challenge when you're dealing with people. And, and the thing of it is that when you look at Pacific history, if you can find a book or listen to someone's interview just like this interview, what you hear, and you hear over and over again, are the same names. It doesn't change. It's the same name. And even though Pacific was small and is still small, that is not the reason, that's not the excuse we should keep hearing the same old names. There are many families here that have as deeply rooted ties as I have, and as some of them other old family names. We need to hear their stories.
I agree.
Yeah, they have a serious part. Their families took a serious part in bringing Pacific along to where it is today. Yeah, yeah. There's still a lot of old family around here that can share their stories.